At my son's lavish wedding, a small accident turned into a public humiliation. My new daughter-in-law slapped me, shouting "useless old woman" as my son laughed alongside her. My hands bled as I cleaned, completely alone. I simply nodded, but something inside me snapped. This is the story of how that day changed everything. Like, share, and let me know where you are listening from. The grand ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, reflecting off polished marble floors and a sea of perfectly coiffed guests. Alex's wedding to Chloe was everything a fairy tale should be, a spectacle of opulence and refined taste that Martha, at 65, felt utterly out of place in. She had chosen her best dress, a classic navy blue silk that had seen her through many important, though far less extravagant, occasions. Tonight, however, it felt like a relic, a whisper from a forgotten era amidst the designer gowns and sharp, modern suits. She was proud of Alex, of course, for building such a life, for marrying such a beautiful, influential woman. Yet, a quiet unease settled in her stomach, a feeling of being an observer rather than a cherished participant. The toasts began, punctuated by laughter and the clink of champagne flutes. Martha sat at a round table near the back, nursing a glass of red wine, trying to follow the speeches over the murmur of conversations around her. She found herself smiling politely, even when she didn't quite catch the joke, a familiar habit of navigating social gatherings where she felt she didn't quite belong. As the best man launched into an anecdote about Alex's college days, Martha shifted, perhaps to get a better view, perhaps just to alleviate the stiffness in her back. Her hand, a little unsteady with age and nerves, bumped the wine glass. Time seemed to slow as the dark liquid arced through the air, then splashed against the pristine white Italian silk gown worn by Chloe's mother, Victoria. A gasp rippled through Victoria's table, quickly followed by a hush that spread across the ballroom. Martha's heart leaped into her throat. "Oh, my goodness, I am so sorry," she stammered, reaching instinctively for a napkin. Before her hand could even touch the table, a sharp, stinging pain erupted on her left cheek. The sound of the slap cut through the sudden silence. Chloe stood over her, eyes blazing, a furious flush creeping up her neck. "Useless old woman," Chloe hissed, her voice low but laced with venom that carried clearly in the suddenly quiet room. Martha froze, her hand still hovering in the air. Her cheek burned, a vibrant, humiliating throb. All eyes were on her, 100 faces, some curious, some shocked, many simply staring, cold and judgmental. She could feel the heat rising in her own face, a wave of shame washing over her. She tried again, her voice barely a whisper. I can help. Let me. Don't touch her," Chloe shrieked, her voice now high-pitched, cutting through the air like a knife. "You've done enough damage. Just clean it up now, you useless old woman." The repetition of those words, "useless old woman," felt like a physical blow. Martha's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and mortification. She looked desperately towards her son, Alex, hoping for a flicker of recognition, a sign of support. His eyes met hers for a fleeting second. Then he turned away, a small, derisive laugh escaping his lips. "Mom's always been a klutz," he said, shaking his head slightly, as if to apologize for her existence to his new wife's family. Some things never change. A terrible stillness settled within Martha. It wasn't just the burning on her cheek, or the pounding in her chest, or the humiliation of those 100 staring guests. It was the absolute, casual cruelty of her own son. In that moment, something inside her died. A hope, a belief, a deep, foundational love that she had always thought was unconditional. It simply withered and crumbled. She looked down. The wine glass had shattered on the table, glistening shards reflecting the opulent lights like mocking diamonds. Martha, without a word, began to pick up the pieces. A sliver of glass pricked her skin, and a tiny bead of crimson welled up, mingling with the spilled red wine on the white tablecloth. No one offered to help. No one offered a kind word. Just the quiet whispers of the guests, a buzzing drone she couldn't quite make out. Victoria, Chloe's mother, finally broke the silence, her voice icy calm. The dry cleaning bill for this gown is $50,000. I'll have it sent to you, Martha. Martha simply nodded, her gaze fixed on her bleeding fingers. $50,000. She knew she couldn't afford it, not in a lifetime. Alex, meanwhile, had moved to Chloe's side, his arm wrapped protectively around her, murmuring reassurances. He didn't spare his mother another glance. The guests around them resumed their hushed conversations, but the focus was still Martha. She heard snippets, phrases like embarrassing, so inappropriate, and then the most cutting question of all, why was she even invited? The words were like daggers, confirming every insecurity she had harbored that night. She wasn't family. She was an obligation, a burden. Martha didn't remember standing up, didn't remember excusing herself. She just found herself moving, a ghost gliding past tables, out of the glittering ballroom, past the stunned ushers, and into the cool night air. The drive home was a blur, her vision clouded by unshed tears and a searing pain in her heart that eclipsed the sting on her cheek. When she finally pulled into her own driveway, the familiar facade of her small, quiet house seemed to mock her. The silence inside was deafening, amplified by the echoes of a ballroom full of contempt. She walked into the living room, her eyes falling on the pristine wedding invitation still sitting on the mantelpiece, a stark white rectangle against the dark wood. It had been delivered with such fanfare, such anticipation. Now, it felt like a summons, a notice of her expendability. She wasn't a guest of honor, not even a loved one. She was simply an obligation. Lying in her bed later, the room plunged into darkness. Martha finally let the tears come. They streamed down her face, scalding trails that mirrored the burn on her cheek. This wasn't a sudden storm. It was the culmination of years of casual cruelty, of subtle slights, of being overlooked and dismissed. She had been too blind, too desperate to believe in the family she thought she had, to see it for what it truly was. The truth, cold and sharp, finally pierced through her denial. She wasn't Alex's mother anymore. She was just an inconvenience. The night stretched before Martha, an endless expanse of darkness punctuated only by the relentless ticking of the clock in her silent house. Sleep was an impossible luxury, chased away by the vivid, burning memory of Chloe's slap and Alex's casual, dismissive laughter. Her mind, raw and wounded, refused to rest, instead forcing her to retrace the steps of her life, searching for an answer. Where had she gone wrong? What crucial turn had she missed that led her beloved son to become a stranger who watched her humiliation with indifference? Decades of memories unfurled, a bittersweet tapestry woven with threads of sacrifice and unspoken love, each one now tinged with the bitter taste of regret. The first thread, the one that seemed to unravel everything, stretched back to when Alex was just 6 years old. A bright-eyed, boisterous boy with an infectious giggle. That was the year his father left. Martha remembered the sting of his words with agonizing clarity, etched forever into her heart. "I'm just not cut out for family life, Martha. This isn't for me." He hadn't even looked at Alex, hadn't said goodbye. Martha, reeling from the betrayal, had swallowed her own heartbreak and conjured a necessary lie for her son. "Daddy's gone on a very important business trip," she had told Alex, her voice wavering despite her best efforts. "He'll be gone a while, but he loves you very much." The lie tasted like ashes in her mouth, but the relief in Alex's innocent eyes, the way his small hand tightened in hers, made it feel like a necessary evil. She'd promised herself then, in that quiet, devastated moment, that Alex would never feel the void his father left. She would be enough. More than enough. From that day forward, Martha's life ceased to be her own. Every breath, every decision, every ounce of her energy was poured into Alex. She worked double shifts at the local garment factory, the rhythmic whir of sewing machines becoming the soundtrack to her existence. Her hands, once soft, grew calloused and rough, often raw from the constant friction and harsh detergents. Her feet, perpetually swollen and aching, bore the weight of long hours spent standing, stitching, and pressing. The exhaustion was bone deep, a constant companion, but the thought of Alex, of providing him with a stable home, with opportunities she never had, fueled her. She clung to the image of his bright smile, the way his eyes lit up when she brought home a small treat. and she pushed through the fatigue. Day after relentless day, her own needs vanished. New shoes? A frivolous expense. Clothes for herself? Only when absolutely necessary. And then from the clearance rack, she remembered a particularly painful sacrifice, the selling of her grandmother's delicate silver locket, an heirloom passed down through generations. It was her most cherished possession, a tangible link to her own past, a comfort in lonely moments. But Alex needed Little League equipment. His worn-out glove was falling apart, and he yearned for his own proper bat. The local store had a sale, but even that was beyond her strained budget. With a heavy heart, she had taken the locket to a pawn shop, the meager sum received barely covering the cost of the baseball gear. But the joy on Alex's face when he unwrapped his new glove and bat was, for a time, enough to soothe the ache of loss. She enrolled him in piano lessons, enduring the clunky old upright her neighbor sold her at a steep discount, and driving him twice a week to Mrs. Jenkins's house, often arriving late to her second factory shift because the bus schedules didn't align. Summers, when other kids in the neighborhood ran wild, Alex went to summer camp, experiencing nature, making friends, learning new skills. Martha scrimped and saved, often going without lunch, meticulously squirreling away every spare dollar into a special account. It was her secret project, a painstakingly built college fund. Each deposit, no matter how small, felt like a brick in the foundation of Alex's future, a testament to her unwavering belief in him, a silent declaration that he was loved, valued, and destined for more than the life she had. But somewhere along the way, Martha now realized, her sacrifices became invisible to him. They transitioned from extraordinary acts of love into the expected, the normal, the long hours, the worn-out clothes, the silent refusal of any personal luxury. These simply became the backdrop of his childhood, the unquestioned fabric of their lives. He never saw the raw hands, only the clean clothes. He never felt the aching feet, only the steady rhythm of their home. He never knew the depth of the yearning that went into every penny saved. Only the opportunities provided. The first real crack in her perception of this unspoken contract of love came at Alex's high school graduation. It was a momentous day, a milestone Martha had dreamed of for years. He looked so handsome in his cap and gown, so full of promise. She had saved for months, carefully choosing an expensive watch, a sophisticated timepiece she imagined him wearing to job interviews, to important meetings, a symbol of the successful man he was becoming. She presented it to him after the ceremony, her heart swelling with pride and a fierce, maternal love. "Thanks, Mom," he said, taking the small box. His eyes, however, barely glanced at the gleaming metal. He didn't even open it fully, merely peeking inside before slipping the elegant box into the pocket of his gown, already distracted by friends calling his name. He gave her a quick, almost perfunctory hug, then vanished into the celebratory throng. Martha's smile faltered, but she pushed the pang of disappointment deep down, telling herself he was just excited, overwhelmed. Weeks later, while tidying his room before he left for college, she found the small, velvet box tucked away in a drawer, still unwrapped, the expensive watch gleaming coldly in its silk lining, forgotten. It was a small thing, she told herself then. But the memory now, under the harsh light of the wedding humiliation, felt like a premonition. The sting of the wedding humiliation lingered, but beneath it, Martha could now clearly see the long, slow erosion of her place in Alex's life. College, a dream Martha had worked tirelessly to fund, brought with it a new, unforeseen wave of financial strain. Alex, after receiving his acceptance letters, didn't want to attend the state university her modest savings could cover. He desired a better school, a prestigious institution that promised a more direct path to the kind of success he envisioned for himself. Martha's heart had swelled with a familiar mix of pride and anxiety. She wanted him to have the best, always. So, she took out a second mortgage on her small house, the only substantial asset she owned. The thought of losing her home, the sanctuary she had created for Alex, sent shivers down her spine. But his ambition overshadowed her fear. She added weekend office cleaning jobs to her already grueling factory schedule, scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans in silent anonymity, while others enjoyed their Saturdays. Her meals became a monotonous rotation of peanut butter sandwiches and instant coffee, all to ensure Alex had enough for textbooks, for his dorm essentials, for the occasional pizza with friends. She had sacrificed, without question, because that was what mothers did. The introduction of Chloe into their lives was subtle. At first, Alex brought her home during a Thanksgiving break in his junior year. Martha had prepared her best pot roast, the scent of rosemary and garlic filling her small, cozy home. Chloe, elegant even in casual clothes, had politely complimented the meal. But Martha sensed an unspoken disapproval, a faint wrinkle of Chloe's nose, a quick glance around Martha's modestly furnished living room, a subtle tightening of her lips. It wasn't overt, but Martha felt it, a silent judgment hanging in the air. Her simple life, her hard-won comfort, seemed to fall short of Chloe's expectations. Chloe's influence on Alex began almost immediately, a quiet, insidious drip. Her comments were never direct criticisms of Martha, but rather carefully phrased observations that chipped away at Alex's perception of his mother. "Successful men need to surround themselves with success," Chloe would say, a gentle hand on Alex's arm, her eyes lingering on Martha's worn kitchen table. Or, "My therapist says that healthy boundaries are so important for emotional well-being, especially with family." Alex, increasingly enamored, began to echo these sentiments, subtly, at first, then more overtly. His visits home grew less frequent, his phone calls shorter and increasingly impatient. When Martha tried to share her daily concerns or her small joys, he would often cut her off, dismissing her experiences as irrelevant or beneath his new, sophisticated world. "Mom, you just wouldn't understand," he'd say, his voice laced with an exasperated weariness. "It's different in the city, with high finance." Martha, yearning to connect, to understand his new life, would simply nod, her heart aching with a growing sense of distance. After graduation, Alex landed a coveted job in finance. He seemed to thrive in his new environment, effortlessly adopting the polished veneer of his successful peers. Then came the first request that felt less like a need and more like an expectation. "Mom," he'd called, his voice bright with an almost professional enthusiasm. "I've got an amazing investment opportunity. It's a sure thing, but I need some seed money. 20,000 would get me in." He promised to repay her with interest in 6 months, detailing the potential returns with an impressive array of financial jargon. Martha's retirement fund, painstakingly built through decades of factory work, was her only safety net. But Alex's dreams, his future, were paramount. She transferred the money. 6 months passed. Then a year. The loan was never repaid. When Martha, hesitantly, brought it up during a brief phone call, Alex sounded surprised, almost offended. "Mom, that wasn't a loan," he said, a note of dismissal in his tone. "That was an investment in my future." "I thought you understood that." He made it sound as if she were petty, greedy even, for asking for her money back. Martha, stung by his words, retreated, telling herself that perhaps he was right, that it was indeed an investment in his life, and that was enough. Then came the engagement to Chloe, a lavish affair that Martha only learned about through a social media post. She was thrilled, of course, for Alex, despite the deepening chasm between them. Soon after, another call. "Mom, Chloe and I are planning the honeymoon of our dreams, but we're a little short. 15,000 would make all the difference." Martha's small vacation fund, earmarked for a modest trip she hoped to take someday, a quiet respite from years of toil, was wiped out with a single transfer. The requests escalated. A few months later, it was a down payment for their starter house, a sprawling suburban property that dwarfed Martha's own. 45,000, Mom, Alex said, his voice brimming with excitement. "And we can finally put down roots." Chloe, on speakerphone, chimed in sweetly, her voice like honey. "You're investing in your grandchildren's future, Martha. A beautiful home for them to grow up in. Isn't that what grandmothers do?" Martha looked at her carefully guarded savings account, the years of sacrifice condensed into a dwindling number. Grandchildren? The word was a balm, a promise of connection. She agreed, hoping that these financial gifts were her way of buying her way into their lives, into the family unit she so desperately longed to be a part of. She didn't realize she was simply buying scraps of attention, buying a relationship that should have been freely given. Each financial gift, each sacrifice, paradoxically seemed to diminish her in their eyes. She felt like a resource to be tapped, a wallet to be opened, rather than a mother to be cherished. The gratitude, if it ever existed, faded quickly, replaced by an air of expectation, as if these offerings were her duty, her natural role in their grand, ascending lives. She became, in her own estimation, a woman who had to pay for affection, for a seat at the table. The final insult, the one that had cut deep but whose true meaning she had been too blind to comprehend at the time, was the wedding invitation itself. There was no mother of the groom designation, no place for her in the official bridal party. Her name was simply listed, blandly, among the other guests. And at the reception, the small, round table, tucked away in the corner, far from the head table, far from her son, far from any sense of belonging. She had dismissed it then as an oversight, a logistical error. Now, in the harsh light of a sleepless night, she knew it was no accident. It was a clear, unambiguous statement of her diminished status, a premonition of the humiliation that would unfold. 3 agonizing weeks crawled by after the wedding, each day an empty echo of the last. The silence from Alex was deafening. No phone call, no text message, no attempt to check in, or to apologize, or to simply acknowledge her existence. It was as if she had become a ghost, a translucent figure that had attended his wedding and then simply faded from memory. The pain of the humiliation at the reception had begun to dull, replaced by a colder, sharper ache of absolute abandonment. Martha wandered her house, a solitary figure in a home that once vibrated with the life she poured into it. Her mind, left to its own devices, spiraled through endless replays of the past, each memory more painful than the last. One Tuesday morning, restless and desperate for a distraction, Martha decided to tackle the spare bedroom. It had become a repository for forgotten things, a place where boxes accumulated over the years, undisturbed. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight that pierced the drawn blinds. She started by pulling out an old trunk, filled with childhood toys, faded report cards, and a jumble of miscellaneous papers. As she sifted through the boxes, her fingers brushing against relics of a life she barely recognized, she unearthed a nondescript cardboard box labeled simply, "Financial Records." Curiosity, a rare commodity in her recent emotional landscape, piqued. She opened it, expecting to find old utility bills or tax documents. Instead, she discovered a carefully organized collection of papers, each one a stark, undeniable record of her financial dealings with Alex. Her heart gave a sudden lurch, a premonition of discovery tightening in her chest. The first document on top was the original loan agreement for $20,000. It was dated a few months after Alex's college graduation, the one he had called an investment opportunity. There, in black and white, were the terms: borrower, Alex Mitchell, agrees to repay lender, Martha Mitchell, the sum of $20,000 with 3% interest within 6 months of the agreement date. And there, at the bottom, was Alex's familiar, confident signature. Martha's hands trembled as she held the paper. He had acknowledged it as a loan, a formal debt, not a gift, not an investment in his future. The casual dismissal of her money, the claim that she understood it was a gift, was a deliberate lie. Her eyes scanned the other documents. There was a copy of the check for $45,000, the one for their house down payment. And there, on the memo line, in Alex's distinct handwriting, was a single, damning word: loan. Not gift, not contribution. Loan. The warmth she had felt imagining her grandchildren playing in that house, the sense of contributing to their future, evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard knot of betrayal. Next, a promissory note, meticulously detailed, also in Alex's handwriting. It was for the $15,000 for their honeymoon. The words stared up at her. I, Alex Mitchell, promise to repay Martha Mitchell the sum of $15,000 within 2 years from this date. He had even specified an interest rate, a small one, but enough to make it legally binding. Every time he had spoken of that honeymoon, it was as if she had simply given them a lavish present, a mother's generous gesture. He had never once mentioned repayment, never once treated it as a debt. Martha felt a profound sense of nausea rising within her. It wasn't just forgetfulness, she realized. It wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional. He knew. He had always known. Then came the most shocking discovery of all, buried beneath a stack of old bank statements. It was Alex's mortgage credit application for the very house she had helped him purchase. Her eyes darted to the section on outstanding debts. And there it was, in crisp, official print. Personal loan from M. Mitchell, $80,000. $80,000. Not just the $45,000 for the down payment, but the $20,000 for his investment, and the $15,000 for the honeymoon. He had consolidated them, acknowledged them, and declared them as legitimate debts to the bank. A gasp escaped Martha's lips, a sound somewhere between a sob and a strangled cry. He had acknowledged the debt to the bank, to a cold, impersonal institution, but never to her, his own mother. He had viewed her, not as a source of love and support, but as a resource to be exploited, a personal ATM that required no interest, no repayment, and certainly no gratitude. The mask had slipped, revealing a calculating, self-serving individual she barely recognized as her son. This wasn't merely financial oversight or the youthful ignorance of a privileged young man. This was calculated theft from his own mother, perpetrated under the guise of familial affection and urgent need. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The way he had used specific words, investment opportunity, grandkids' future, dream honeymoon, to tug at her heartstrings, to exploit her unwavering love and desire to be a part of his life. It was a systematic manipulation, a deliberate campaign to extract money from her while simultaneously diminishing her worth, her contributions, and her very identity as his mother. The documents, cold and irrefutable, laid bare a truth that had been slowly eating away at her for years, a truth she had stubbornly refused to see. Alex wasn't just ungrateful. He was manipulative. He was a thief. And for the first time, Martha felt a flicker of something new amidst the pain. A chilling resolve. If you're finding yourself engrossed in Martha's story, don't miss what happens next. Make sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you won't miss the upcoming parts. Your support means the world to me. The stack of documents in her trembling hands felt heavier than they looked, each page a fresh wound. As Martha processed the stark evidence of Alex's calculated deception, another memory, sharp and bitter, surfaced. It was just a few months before the wedding, and Alex had called, his voice laced with a tremor of urgency. "Mom," he'd said. "Chloe. She's having some health issues. We need $25,000, quickly." The desperation in his voice had sounded so genuine, so raw. Martha, her heart clenching with immediate concern for her future daughter-in-law, hadn't hesitated. She had liquidated her last substantial savings, the small emergency fund she kept for her own unexpected health scares or repairs to her aging house. She'd made the transfer within the hour, a mother's instinct overriding any logical hesitation. 2 weeks later, scrolling through social media, Martha had seen Chloe's posts. Stunning photos of a luxurious weekend in Napa Valley, complete with vineyard tours, gourmet meals, and a radiant, perfectly healthy-looking Chloe sipping champagne. Martha had called Alex, a tremor of unease in her own voice. "Chloe looks wonderful," she'd said, trying to keep her tone light. "What about her health issues?" Alex had laughed. A short, dismissive sound. "Oh, that. Chloe's parents surprised us with a trip to celebrate her good news. All clear from the doctors. Wonderful, right?" Martha had forced a smile, murmuring congratulations, but a tiny, discordant note had sounded in her heart. Now, looking at the mortgage application that listed Chloe's personal loan from M. Mitchell, $80,000, Martha knew that the $25,000 for health issues had been yet another calculated lie. It was part of an undeniable, consistent pattern of deceit and manipulation that had been unfolding right under her nose for years. She meticulously calculated the documented loans, the $20,000 for the investment, the $15,000 for the honeymoon, the $45,000 for the house down payment, and now the additional $25,000 for Chloe's health issues. The total, an astonishing $105,000, was enough to make her gasp aloud. But then, there were the undocumented cash gifts, the smaller sums Alex had requested over the years for emergencies, the sudden need for a new laptop for work, the unexpected car repair, the utility bill that was about to be shut off. Martha had always just sent the money, never asking for receipts or proof, always believing her son. Now, she replayed those calls in her mind, seeing the carefully crafted urgency, the subtle hints of despair designed to trigger her maternal instincts. She estimated at least another $20,000 to $30,000 had gone this way. The grand total, in her trembling estimation, exceeded $130,000. It wasn't just money. It was her entire life savings, her retirement security, carefully built brick by painful brick over decades of back-breaking work, her dreams of travel, of a peaceful, comfortable old age, of finally enjoying the fruits of her labor. All of it, gone. And what had she received in return? A public slap in the face at her son's wedding, followed by 3 weeks of agonizing silence and abandonment. The exchange felt like a cruel joke, a cosmic imbalance. As she sat, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal, Martha finally understood. Alex hadn't just taken her money, he had exploited her. He had weaponized her deepest vulnerabilities, her unconditional love, her guilt over his father's abandonment that made her overcompensate, her desperate need to feel useful, to be a good mother, to be needed by him. He had used it all against her, twisting her love into a tool for his own enrichment. A wave of regret washed over her, chilling her to the bone. She recalled all the times she had apologized to Alex. Apologies for not having more money, for not being able to provide more, for even timidly suggesting repayment for a small loan once. She now realized with sickening clarity, inadvertently trained him to see me as a victim. Her unspoken plea for understanding, her quiet sacrifices, had only reinforced his perception of her as someone to be used, someone whose needs and feelings were secondary, negligible. She had allowed herself to be diminished, and he had taken full advantage. But as the last vestiges of self-blame faded, a new emotion began to bloom in Martha's heart. It wasn't the dull ache of sadness, nor the sharp sting of betrayal, nor the hot flush of humiliation. It was a surge of clean, pure, righteous anger. It coursed through her veins, invigorating, clarifying. For weeks, she had been a ghost, a victim. But no longer. She gathered the documents, carefully stacking them into a neat pile. The weight of them in her hands was no longer a burden, but a source of strength. A new conviction solidified within her, hard and unyielding. For the first time in 15 years, she wasn't going to apologize for taking up space in her own son's life. She wasn't going to apologize for having needs, for having worth, for demanding respect. The silence from Alex had broken her, but these documents, these cold, hard facts, had put her back together, stronger and sharper than before. The game, she realized, had changed. The night after her discovery was, like many before it, sleepless. But this time, the darkness wasn't filled with despair or self-pity. Instead, Martha's mind was clear, focused, and burning with a newfound resolve. She lay awake, meticulously planning her next steps. The documents she'd uncovered laid out on her bedside table, a silent testament to her resolve. The confusion, the hurt, the betrayal. They were still there, but they were now channeled into a singular, purposeful direction. The next morning, Martha found herself in a sleek, modern office building downtown, a world away from her small, familiar home. She had made an appointment with Eleanor Vance at Henderson & Associates, a law firm that specialized, as her online search had indicated, in family financial disputes and elder financial abuse. Eleanor was a woman in her late 40s, with keen, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that Martha immediately found reassuring. Martha presented her meticulously organized folder, each document clearly labeled. Eleanor Vance took them, her expression calm and professional, and began to review them, one by one. She took her time, occasionally making a note, her pen scratching softly on a legal pad. Martha watched her, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach, yet also a flicker of hope. After a thorough review, Eleanor looked up, her gaze steady. "Martha," she began, her voice firm. "These aren't gifts. These are documented loans with specific terms. In the eyes of the law, your son, Alex Mitchell, absolutely owes you this money." The words, so simple yet so powerful, resonated deep within Martha. It wasn't just her feeling, her belief. It was a legal fact. Eleanor tallied the figures. Based on these documents alone, the outstanding principal debt is approximately $83,247. This doesn't include the undocumented cash gifts you mentioned, or any interest that may have accrued as per some of these agreements. The sum, laid bare by a third party, felt astronomical, a lifetime of sacrifice stripped away. Eleanor then outlined Martha's options. "We can start with a formal demand letter, requesting immediate repayment. If that doesn't yield results, we can proceed with a civil lawsuit." She leaned forward slightly. "With this clear and comprehensive documentation, Martha, your chances are very strong." A flicker of the old Martha, the one who always prioritized Alex's happiness, emerged. "But what about my relationship with Alex?" she asked. Her voice barely a whisper. "This will destroy it, won't it?" Eleanor held her gaze, her expression unyielding. "Martha," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "let me ask you this. When was the last time your son did something that required your forgiveness? Something he acknowledged, truly apologized for, and then made amends?" Martha searched her memory and found nothing. Only dismissals, excuses, and further demands. "And what relationship are you trying to preserve, exactly?" Eleanor continued, pressing the point home. "The one where he exploits your love, takes your money under false pretenses, and then publicly humiliates you and ignores you for weeks? Right now, you're not his mother. You're his victim. Is that really what you want to preserve?" The words hung in the air, a stark, painful truth. Victim. The word resonated with the feeling she'd carried for so long, the role she had inadvertently played. No, she thought, a surge of defiant strength rising within her. That was not what she wanted to preserve. With a deep, resolute breath, Martha signed the retainer agreement. As she did, Eleanor offered a crucial piece of advice. "Don't take his calls, Martha. Don't respond to his texts or emails. All communication regarding this matter goes through this office now. It's important for your emotional well-being and for the legal process." Leaving the law firm, Martha felt a strange lightness, a burden lifted. The path ahead was daunting, but she was no longer walking it alone. She returned home and immediately began making small but significant changes. She set up automatic bill payments for her utilities, a task Alex used to help her with, subtly giving him access to her accounts. She changed her emergency contact at her doctor's office, and with her utility providers from Alex to her kind neighbor, Sarah, she threw away the frozen casseroles she had habitually prepared and saved, just in case Alex visits. She packed up most of his childhood photos from around the house, placing them in a box in the attic, out of sight, out of mind. And for the first time in years, she started turning her phone silent at night, reclaiming her peaceful sleep. A week later, Eleanor called. "The demand letter is ready," she announced. "Would you like me to read it to you?" Eleanor's voice, clear and unwavering, recited the formal language. "We represent Martha Mitchell regarding outstanding financial obligations from Alex Mitchell. You are hereby formally notified that Mr. Mitchell owes Miss Mitchell the principal sum of $83,247, plus applicable interest as per the attached agreements." It felt surreal, hearing her pain, her sacrifice, distilled into cold legal terms. In the days that followed, Waiting for the letter to be delivered, Martha embraced her newfound freedom. She enrolled in a local watercolor class, something she'd always wanted to do. She made a long overdue doctor's appointment. She started taking evening walks around her neighborhood, the fresh air and quiet solitude offering her space, room to breathe and think that had been missing from her life for too long. 3 days before the demand letter was scheduled to be delivered to Alex, Martha was at Sarah's house, enjoying a cup of coffee and their usual morning chat. Her phone rang. It was Sarah's number. But Sarah was right there. "It's your home number, Martha," Sarah said, picking up her own phone. "Oh, it's just the machine," she added, then paused, her eyes widening slightly as she listened. "Martha," Sarah whispered, covering the receiver. "It's Chloe. She's in your driveway, waiting in her car." Martha, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips, calmly took another sip of her coffee. When Martha finally returned home from Sarah's, Chloe was indeed waiting, perched impatiently in her gleaming luxury car in the driveway. As Martha approached, Chloe emerged, affecting an unnatural brightness, a strained smile plastered on her face. "Martha! So glad I caught you," she chirped, her voice a little too high. "Alex and I were hoping to talk about some misunderstandings regarding the wedding." Martha simply nodded, a calm, almost serene expression on her face. She walked up her porch steps, unlocked her front door, and stepped inside, leaving the door ajar. Chloe hesitated for a moment, then followed, her designer heels clicking uncomfortably on Martha's worn linoleum floor. In Martha's modest living room, filled with faded upholstery and trinkets accumulated over a lifetime, Chloe looked entirely out of place, like a rare, exotic bird trapped in a sparrow's nest. "Can I get you some water?" Martha offered, her tone even. She took her time retrieving 2 glasses, filling them from the tap, acutely aware of Chloe's restless glances around the room, the barely concealed disdain for her humble surroundings. Chloe, trying to regain control of the conversation, started fishing for information. "Alex mentioned you might be feeling a little isolated lately," she began, her voice dripping with false concern. "He said you haven't been answering his calls." Martha handed her a glass of water, her eyes meeting Chloe's. "Actually, I've been quite busy lately," she replied, a faint, knowing smile touching her lips. "Watercolor classes, doctor's appointments, long walks. It's amazing how much time you have when you're not constantly worried about other people's problems." Chloe's smile wavered slightly, her perfectly made-up face betraying a flicker of irritation. "Well," Chloe pressed on, quickly recovering, "Alex and I thought we should have a family dinner soon, to clear the air. He feels terrible, you know. But he's too proud to be the first one to reach out." Martha's gaze was unwavering. "What exactly does he feel terrible about, Chloe?" she asked directly. "Does he feel terrible about his new wife assaulting his mother at his wedding? Or does he feel terrible about laughing while I was slapped across the face?" Chloe's carefully constructed composure cracked. Her eyes widened, and a defensive flush crept up her neck. "It was an accident, Martha. And that dress, it was a $50,000 Italian silk gown. My mother was furious," she sputtered, attempting to justify her egregious actions. "An accident that resulted in you assaulting a 65-year-old woman," Martha corrected, her voice clear and steady. "And my son, your husband, found it amusing. Do you remember his laughter, Chloe?" Chloe stammered. He was just trying to lighten the mood. He didn't think you were hurt. He said you were tough." "You're right," Martha retorted, her gaze sharpening. "I am tough. Tougher than you think." At that precise moment, the front door swung open without a knock. Alex strode in, unannounced, as if he still lived there, his face a mask of concern that Martha instantly recognized as performative. He clearly expected to find Chloe in tears and Martha apologetic, ready to be forgiven. "Mom, Chloe, what's going on?" he began, trying to take charge. Martha cut him off, her voice devoid of emotion. "We were just discussing Chloe's apology," she stated calmly, "which I'm still waiting to hear." Alex's eyes flickered between the two women, sensing the shift in dynamics. "Mom, let's not make a big deal out of this. It was an accident. We're family. We can talk about this later." He tried to put an arm around Chloe, but she stiffened. "Oh, we're definitely family," Martha agreed, her smile tightening. "And speaking of family, while cleaning the spare bedroom the other day, I accidentally discovered some very interesting documents. Financial documents, in fact." Alex's face, which had been attempting to project a casual nonchalance, went utterly, sickeningly pale. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking ashen. He knew exactly what she was talking about. Martha continued, her voice light, almost conversational. "Amazing how different things look when you review them with fresh eyes, isn't it, Alex?" Alex suddenly looked desperate. "Mom, I think maybe we should just talk about this later, alone." He took a step towards the door. Martha raised a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "No, Alex," she said, her voice firm, resolute. It was the first time in 20 years she had dismissed her son from her house. The shock on his face was palpable, quickly followed by anger. Alex and Chloe exchanged furious glances, then stalked out, slamming the door behind them. Martha watched from her window as they had an intense, hushed argument by their car before speeding away. Almost immediately, Alex's phone calls began. Martha let them all go to voicemail, as Eleanor had advised. The demand letter was delivered the next day. The voicemails escalated in tone. From initial anger, "Mom, what the hell is this?" to confusion, then panic, then desperate pleas. "Mom, please call me back. We can talk about this. Mom, I'm coming over if you don't pick up." The following morning, Alex pounded on Martha's door, his furious shouts echoing through the quiet street. Martha, still following Eleanor's instructions, didn't answer. Sarah, ever vigilant, stepped out her own door. "She's not receiving visitors today, Alex," she said calmly, her arms crossed. Alex, stunned, backed away, unable to argue with Sarah's unwavering resolve. Later that afternoon, Chloe arrived, this time alone, her face blotchy with tears. She began to wail dramatically. "Martha, you're destroying our family. How could you do this?" Martha, sipping tea in her living room, calmly opened the window slightly. "The same way you destroyed my dress at your wedding, Chloe," she replied, her voice steady. "It's not the same," Chloe shrieked, tears streaming down her face. "You're right," Martha said, a cold edge to her voice. "Your dress cost $50,000. What I'm asking for is only $83,000. Such a bargain, don't you think?" She closed the window. On the deadline day specified in the demand letter, Martha received a call from a lawyer named Benjamin Stone. "Mr. Stone," Martha said, her voice betraying no hint of emotion. "All communication regarding this matter should be directed to my lawyer, Eleanor Vance, at Henderson and Associates." "But Martha, surely we can talk about this as family?" Stone tried. Martha's resolve hardened. "Mr. Stone, your client stopped being my family the moment he decided I was worth laughing at, while his wife assaulted me. Now he's just someone who owes me money." She hung up, a sense of quiet triumph settling over her. The civil suit was officially filed the following Monday, a decisive line drawn in the sand. The initial panicked voicemails from Alex intensified, evolving into a desperate barrage of manipulative tactics. Guilt-inducing letters arrived, thick envelopes filled with tear-stained apologies and promises of change. Relatives Martha hadn't heard from in years suddenly called, begging her on Alex's behalf, painting her as cold and unforgiving. On Mother's Day, Alex even showed up on her doorstep with an enormous bouquet of roses, his face a picture of feigned remorse. Martha, however, remained unmoved. Each attempt at manipulation was met with her steadfast silence. All communication channeled directly through Eleanor Vance. Her lawyer efficiently deflected the guilt trips and handled the legal wrangling, leaving Martha free to continue her watercolor classes and evening walks, cultivating the quiet peace she had found. 8 months later, the settlement conference took place. Alex, looking visibly stressed and considerably thinner, sat across from Martha and Eleanor, his usual polished demeanor replaced by a haggard weariness. His lawyer, Benjamin Stone, opened with an offer. Mr. Mitchell is prepared to offer $30,000 to settle this matter. Eleanor Vance didn't even flinch. She leaned forward, her voice clear and precise. Our demand remains unchanged. The full amount owed, plus interest and attorney fees, totals $97,412. Alex's face went white. He turned to his lawyer, then back to Martha, a desperate plea in his eyes. I don't have that kind of cash, Mom. You know that. Eleanor merely arched an eyebrow, her gaze cool. You had it when you took it from your mother, Mr. Mitchell. Figure it out. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the soft rustle of papers. The negotiations dragged on for 6 arduous hours. Martha remained steadfast, her resolve unyielding. She had come too far, sacrificed too much, to back down now. Finally, Alex, cornered, and with no other option, capitulated. He agreed to a payment plan, $50,000 immediately, followed by $2,000 monthly for 2 years. As a condition, his newly purchased house, the very one she had helped him buy, was put up as collateral. As the final documents were signed, Alex looked at Martha. It wasn't love, or affection, or even regret in his eyes. It was respect. A grudging, resentful respect, but respect nonetheless. He had seen her as a victim, a resource, but now he saw a force. Was it worth it, Mom? Alex asked, his voice low, as they were packing up their files. Destroying our relationship over money? Martha met his gaze directly, her voice calm and steady. I didn't destroy anything, Alex. I just stopped pretending it existed. She turned and walked away, leaving him to ponder her words. The first payment arrived on schedule, a certified check for $50,000. Martha deposited it, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. And then, every month for the next 2 years, the $2,000 payments arrived, without fail, without delay. It confirmed what Martha had known all along. Alex had always had the money. He had simply chosen not to repay her, believing he could exploit her love indefinitely. With the initial $50,000, Martha booked herself a month-long trip to Ireland. She explored ancient castles, hiked along dramatic coastlines, and met countless friendly strangers in cozy pubs. In a quaint village in County Cork, she met Fiona, a retired primary school teacher with a mischievous twinkle in her eye. They bonded instantly, sharing stories and laughter, and ended up traveling together for 3 days. By the end of their journey, Martha, feeling a connection she hadn't experienced in years, found herself inviting Fiona to stay with her in America. During one of their conversations, Martha opened up about her son. I have a son, she admitted, a slight pause before adding, but we're not close. It was the first time she had ever said those words out loud, to anyone, without an accompanying wave of shame or guilt. Fiona simply listened, offering comfort and understanding, not judgment. 6 months later, Fiona arrived in America, staying with Martha for several weeks. They continued their travels, exploring new places, and deepening their friendship. The monthly payments from Alex continued to arrive, each one a small victory, a tangible symbol of holding her son accountable. Sarah, her ever-observant neighbor, occasionally mentioned seeing Alex drive by Martha's house, sometimes slowly, but never stopping. Martha would simply nod. She knew that reconciliation required acknowledging wrongdoing, a genuine remorse, not just missing what you'd lost. Alex had lost access to her money, to the unconditional love he had taken for granted. He hadn't yet truly acknowledged how he had caused that loss. Martha was no longer bitter. The sharp edge of anger had slowly faded, replaced by a quiet, profound acceptance. Her love for Alex, she now understood, was not enough to make him a good person, or even a good son, and that was not her fault. She began to redecorate her house, replacing Alex's childhood photos with vibrant images from her travels, alongside new paintings from her watercolor classes. Her home became a reflection of who she was becoming, independent, adventurous, and filled with her own stories. On her 67th birthday, Martha found herself at a small day spa, treating herself to a massage and a facial. As she lay there, a deep sense of peace washed over her. She realized, with startling clarity, that she was happy. Not the desperate, conditional happiness she had always tied to Alex's approval or presence, but a quiet, steady contentment that belonged entirely to her, forged from resilience and self-discovery. Later that day, Fiona called to wish her a happy birthday, chatting excitedly about plans for their next trip. Martha sat in her garden, the afternoon sun warm on her face, and realized Alex's absence felt like his loss, not hers. The last payment arrived a few weeks later. Enclosed was a small note, curtly stating, "Debt paid in full." Martha deposited the check. The note, she tossed into the recycling bin without a second thought. Some debts, she had learned, could never really be paid in full. Not with money, not with apologies. But some freedoms, some peace, some quiet joy, were worth any price.